Hello and welcome to another episode of The Business of Possibility, Ulster University Business School's popular podcast, now in its fourth series. I'm Wendy Austin and it's great to have you join us as we continue our exploration of the world of business, the key themes and the latest research with a host of dynamic leaders, industry experts and top academics. We have an audience with us too here in the Great Hall on the beautiful McGee campus of Ulster University in Derry Londonderry. Now, whether you're in the northwest, the southeast or wherever, one of the items top of every to-do list is supporting employee health and well-being. And with me to discuss the latest trends and the best practices shaping the ways that companies go about that are Catherine Ross, who's Chief Scientific Officer with the Scottish Government and Non-Executive Director with the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust. And Catherine and Greg McCann, who's also with us today, Executive Director of FinTrU Northwest, are also alumni of Ulster University. It's very good to have you both here. And last but absolutely not least, Dr. Shirley Barrett, who's Head of Department of Global Business and Enterprise at Ulster University Business School. So maybe we could start off with the current trends and Catherine, get a bit of an overview from you about what you're seeing in your role and the best practice and examples of what's happening in this space.
Wendy, thank you very much. And if you'll indulge me for a second, as a scientist, I quite like the data and the evidence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the cost of ill health in the context of the workplace. And there's been a huge amount of evidence gathered on this topic very recently, and a number of publications that we've seen in this space. And some of these figures are actually quite startling. It's estimated that ill health is costing the economy in the UK £43 billion per year. And that was a piece of research done by the Institute of Public Policy Research. But also, and probably equally as startling, if not more so, is the loss of income. And it's estimated that it's about £2,500 per year for people who are affected by long-term illnesses. And it probably isn't any great surprise that actually it's vital to have a healthy workforce for the economy. But also, a lot of what we're looking at are really disadvantaged groups who are seeing significant challenges to their finances in terms of ill health in the workplace. And we've seen now that actually our numbers of people who are affected by ill health at work are the highest ever since 2004. And that's taken into consideration as well some of the trends around COVID. And that's also, and I'll stop doing some figures in a moment, I promise, but that's also supported by some of the work from the recent report from the Office of National Statistics saying that actually sickness absence, the percentage of absence of people from work due to ill health and long-term sickness has now risen to 2.6% of the workforce. So that's really quite, I think, startling figures. And I suppose, you know, if we look even at one of the facets of that in terms of mental health, we've seen significant rises. I think we'd all probably agree in mental health illnesses and absence from the workplace. And there's a really interesting report, and I would urge everyone to sort of read this. And it was the Mental Health Foundation and the London School of Economics. And they estimate that the cost to the UK economy of mental health illness is £118 billion per year. And if we consider that's 5% of UK's GDP, that's quite a lot. And obviously that number also looks at the cost to look after people with ill health and mental health, but also what that loss of productivity is like. But probably more importantly, those numbers really reflect the working age population. So almost 3/4 of those people are between the ages of 16 and 69. So actually that's a real significant challenge. But I guess, and more importantly, and I know that we'll explore this today, we need to look beyond the statistics, because actually we have a moral obligation, not just commercial or financial, to ensure the health and well-being of our staff and colleagues indeed in our workplace. And whilst I think we've seen quite a lot, particularly in recent years, around flexible working from home, discounted gym memberships, and particularly things such as mental health or wellbeing apps. I think there's quite a lot we need to do, and I suspect we will explore that in conversation. Looking forward to hearing from colleagues as well around that. But I think there's certainly a sort of a profound sense that we need to move into healthier businesses with healthier workforce and teams.
That's very interesting, isn't it? And as you say, quite startling in some ways too. I mean, Greg, you run an organisation. Your organisation would have a lot of young people in it, in FinTrU. Obviously, not all young people, but quite a lot of young people. Sorry, that wasn't aimed at you. But given those statistics that Catherine has been sharing with us there, how are organisations like yours adapting to meet the evolving needs of the workforce, both from a point of view of their physical health and their mental health?
Yeah, well, those costs were quite startling, and very often people will look at the cost of doing some of the stuff where really it's the hidden cost of not doing it. You know, those are really things that the business need to understand. If they don't do some of these things, that there are a lot of costs entailed if you don't do it, rather than the cost of doing it. But for us, we're a growing business and have been growing, year on year. It's all about our ability to attract and retain our talent. So we could say we're a RegTech business working in the financial sector, but really we're a people business with 1,400 people. It took a lot of effort to attract those people and bring them in, either graduate level or lateral hires. They're very talented. We put a lot of effort and money into them, and retaining them and making sure they feel valued and part of and our healthy workforce is up front and central to what we do. And you're right, we have a lot of graduates. We take a lot of grads, and they bring with them their own specific issues as well, which the business has to respond to. Again, to be seen as to do the right thing. It's about doing the right thing. That makes you an employer of choice as well. You get a reputation for doing it well. You attract more talent. People want to work for you. Those things are really right central to what we do, because we have some very talented people. They're very attractive to other people who'd like to hire them. And key to us is how we look after them. So their health and well-being, it makes a really good business sense for us to do it. And we've done it from the start. So we set out in that when we set out in that journey, the business 10 years old, and people have always been at the centre of business. And we are always responding to what those needs are. They do change. Obviously, COVID was a game changer, so that brought a whole new dynamic. We weren't a working from home business. Everybody was in the office. We had to, within a week, I remember it well, 4 years ago, but this week, wasn't it? Shudder, thought it. We literally had to get everybody, within a week, I think it was, from working in the office to home. And that meant giving them all laptops, making sure that was really, really difficult period for us. We survived it. We actually grew rapidly during it, but it brought its own issues and challenges as well. How do people feel working from home, all through COVID, and maintaining their connection there? And thank God we're over that now, and we're back in a hybrid working environment. So again, that brings its own challenges. People are in the office some of the time, they're not there all the time. There's a mixture, so you're always responding to your workforce and the needs that they have. Really, it's the culture. It's at the start of the business really that matters more than anything else.
Shirley, from your point of view, I suppose both in that you're working in a university where there are staff, there are also students who are maybe on placements, that kind of thing. How do you see that the land has changed, if you like, in recent years in dealing with those that you work with in either of those ways, in their physical and mental health?
Yeah, well, I've been with the university for 26 years, and I can say that it is a very different landscape to when I first started here. There weren't any conversations really about mental health, mental well-being, emotional well-being, societal well-being. Those weren't conversations that took place. Ill health was really just seen as a physical thing. And I think what the university has done in terms of developing its approach to well-being, both for staff and for students, I have to say there's equal emphasis on both, is probably reflective of the conversations that are being had in society now. because society itself is beginning to have those conversations and to strip away some of the taboos around talking about these sorts of subjects. The university has been very proactive in recent years in terms of what it does. And as a very large institution, it's been able to invest in a whole host of wellbeing initiatives, a wellbeing team, wellbeing champions who are actually members of staff who feel passionate about wellbeing. So there's a whole swathe of services that are there, not just for staff, but also for students, because we very much realize as staff in the university that, you know, those days where, you know, life was carefree and students didn't have to do anything but party, it's a very different world now, and students deal with a lot of challenges, and it's very important for us in the role that we have, not just as a university to provide them access to the services that they can access, but also to make sure that we in our roles as academic are very responsive to that as well. So I think what the university is doing, as I say, is very in keeping with the conversations which are thankfully now happening and hopefully will continue to happen so that everybody benefits from it.
It's an interesting situation, isn't it? I mean, there's been such a demographic change, I suppose. But one of the elements of that is that you can conceivably now have 3 or 4 generations working in the same building. I mean, before I left my regular employment, I was very aware that there were young people that I was working with who actually could have been my grandchildren, which kind of brings you up short, I have to say, when you realise that. But, you know, when you look back at those times when, as you say, those conversations just didn't take place. You know, if you were sick, you rang in and said you were sick and you had to have a line to prove it. But there was no discussion about your emotional well-being or any of that stuff. You left it all at the door. So for the people who come from that time to still be there and to be in this very different situation where you're talking about things like menopause awareness and aging well, but also, you know, there's pejorative discussion of snowflakes and so on. How do you deal with all of that?
It's a very interesting one, and as a head of department, I would have quite a range of age groups within our department and as part of our team. And I think the important thing is that our people are seen as individuals. And certainly that has been my experience, that there isn't a one size fits all. And it really is about creating the sort of environment where people can feel as if they can come and talk to you. I mean, most recently in 2022, the university published its first policy on menopause. Now, given that we're over half the university, and some of the detrimental effects that can be as a result of perimenopause and menopause, it was a long overdue conversation. Again, I'm glad that it happened in tandem with society speaking more about it. But we now do have a policy in place that does address that. And I think that's one of those very difficult ones to try to get on top of, because it's very difficult to quantify what the impacts are for different individuals. I do think in line with that there is a need for education and training, because menopause doesn't just affect women. It affects everybody. Women are primarily caregivers, and we have, you know, families, friends, and so on. And because of the emotional effects that are attached with it, I think it's very important that we have policy as a starting point. But a policy is only as good as its acceptance and its implementation. So I do think there is a whole piece around not just having a policy, but educating everybody so that everybody has that information, male and female and everyone else, to make sure that everybody is responsive to that. We're still in the early days of that in the university, but happily we're starting to see that sort of policy development now.
Catherine, you're nodding at that. Policies, education and training, how important are all of those to deal with this? It's a huge gamut of things, isn't it?
So I think, as has been said, I think policy is the starting point, but actually it's about normalisation of conversations. And there absolutely, you know, menopause doesn't just affect women. And I think making sure that we normalise those conversations in the workplace so that everyone is part of that conversation. We've seen significant challenges with historically women leaving the workplace because they haven't been able to remain in employment. They've retired early, they've moved to part-time, and actually we've lost significant talent from our workforce. And, we know that significant parts of pretty much every workforce, academia in particular, are females. And we really can't afford to lose that depth of knowledge and experience because we haven't had an open culture. And I think we're really moving to an open culture. We're moving to open and normalised conversations about women's health, about mental health. And I think it's probably more psychologically safe. And I think we're probably more moving into that space now where it's okay to bring your whole self to work, where you are employing the person and you're employing everything that happens around them. You're employing their social interactions, you're employing what happens in their family, you're employing what their hobbies are like. Because actually, you don't just bring part of a person to do the job that we employ them to do. We all have to, I think, be part of everyone's sort of whole self. So I really like the idea of, allowing people to feel that they can be themselves at work and bringing their whole selves to work.
That's a very interesting point, actually, Greg, isn't it? And I wonder, to what extent is this driven by what Catherine mentioned there, which is the fact that there is a real difficulty attracting and keeping staff at the moment. So if that's a driver that you want to keep your people, then you get past the eye roll at this all being too PC and so on, and actually have the proper conversation and bring your whole self to work.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, these people, as Catherine says, they have, when you hire somebody, you bring everything that comes with them. They're not machines. So I was just reflecting on the menopausal. Like when I first started, it was maternity policy, and now we've neonatal policy. We've got parental loss policy. It's just get more sophisticated, more in tune with what people really need. And it's really this PC thing, needs killed dead in my opinion, because most of this isn't that. It's about responding to what people's needs are, and I'm of that older generation where it would be easy for me to lapse into that. And I think there's a piece in the older generation that can be like that, but I think they're just out of tune in my view. So I think you respond to what people need. The thing about health and well-being, like we have about 50 mental health first aiders now trained in our place. The thing about it is, that really for it to work, it has to be integrated to the business, at least part of the business. It can't be a nice to have thing that sits on the side anymore. It used to be, it was somebody looked after it and there was one person, whatever. It has to sit at the core of your business and what you do. If we do a lot of lunch and learns, around all these issues, with everybody goes to them, everybody's at it, everybody's educated what they think, because a lot of it is around awareness. And it has to sit, I say, at the center of your business. It just can't be a nice to have. If you're going to do it well, it has to be fully integrated into the business. And we have a number of committees that look after it, that run by the employees. They drive the agenda, they bring the stuff forward, the lunch and learns, and it's all driven them, but heavily sponsored by senior people. To me, the important is that the buy-in at the top. That's what really counts, because they need to drive it. It needs to be seen as part of the business. And traditionally, it would not be seen as part of the business. It was almost a botheration to the business on the side. But that's really old thinking, and those businesses will fail. So
it becomes part of the company culture, or maybe it actually is the company culture then?
It is the company culture, because people are your business. I say I could sit here and talk now about what we do in the reg tech space for investment banking and bore a lot of people, but really it's delivered through 1,400 people with all the issues that they have and all the potential that they have. If you want to develop, and the real thing is to get the potential out of your people. You want to get the maximum potential out of your people. They're your biggest asset. Are they switched on? Are they coming doing 9 to 5 and going home? Do they have a bag of problems that nobody's interested in? If you do that, you will never get the potential out of them. If you're engaged with them, if they feel you're genuine about it, and you're not playing games. That's really important. Then you will get more engagement out of those people. They will add value, and it makes good business sense as well. You know, it's the right thing to do, but it just makes really good business sense. And the businesses that work well, do it well.
It's changed times, Catherine, isn't it, from the days when that would have been HR's thing. You need to go and see somebody from HR if you were lucky enough to have HR in your company, or maybe in some circumstances not lucky enough to have, because they weren't always helpful. Sorry if you're all from HR in the audience here, but there's good and bad in everyone, isn't there? But you can't just shuffle it off anymore. And the whole listening business and being genuine is so important.
Yeah, and I think just what Greg has described really is a cultural shift, isn't it? It's not just we do it because there's a policy that says we must do it. We do it because actually we feel morally obliged, because we're good people who want to look after each other. And as senior leaders, you want to look after your staff and your teams, but as colleagues, you want to look after each other. And I think if you foster a real cultural change in making sure that everyone feels valued and looked after. One of the things one phrase I really don't like is where people say, look after yourself. Well, what does that really say? That says, I know there's something wrong with you, but I don't have time, so you should look after yourself. And actually, we should be saying to each other, let's look after you. Let's find a way to look after you. So I'm kind of going to give you all a bit of a thing and say, let's stop saying, look after yourself. Because actually it is a team effort in looking after people. And I think that's part of that cultural shift.
It reminds me a bit of some of the podcasts actually that we did for Business of Possibility during COVID. And one of the things that came up almost every time was that people would say that for the first time in their lives, their boss, their big boss, whomever, was asking them before anything else, how are you? So has that kind of stayed in the culture? I mean, is that the bit that we need to hang on to, where rather than saying, look after yourself, you say, well, are you okay? And
I'm not sure if it really has remained. I would say certainly in where I work and in my team, absolutely. It is, people write at the start of an email, I hope this finds you well. Well, really that's just habit. And actually starting a conversation where you say to someone, how are things with you? And actually, a lot of what we do now, the interactions that we have are on Teams or on Zoom, and they're usually, 60-minute meetings. It's not a big deal for 3 minutes at the start just to go, how's things, how is everyone? And really make that just acceptable practice, because I think it's really important to check in with people. And of course, on a group Teams call, they might not want to tell you their woes and problems, but actually, there may be something that you pick up and you think, okay, I need to catch that person later and just make sure that they actually are okay. Because if they're not, then we collectively have a responsibility to do something to make it better. And, we can't afford, either morally or sort of commercially, to lose people because they don't feel well looked after. So, I think for a number of reasons, we have to start looking after people. And more importantly, people have to feel that they're being looked after, because it's one thing us saying it, there's another thing us actually having that as, I guess, the response of the other side, where people know that that's the intention.
Is this something that comes, Shirley, from experience, or given that we're in a university here and we're talking in the context of a business school, is it something that also needs to be taught?
It is. I think there's two parts to it. I think part of it is organic. I think very often what people lose sight of, students themselves, and very often when they come to us, whether, it's in first year or whatever else, I remind them of what my dad said to me when I went to university, and my dad was very education focused. So this came as a real surprise when he said, Shirley, if the only thing you get is a degree parchment in the next 4 years, you will have wasted your time. And I think that's important for students to understand, that this is their opportunity to learn, to navigate, to develop as individuals, to learn how to have healthy relationships and friendships. And part of that is organic. That said, we certainly see a need in the business school, here to make sure that we also provide that wraparound support for students so that they are aware of things and they feel comfortable about talking about things like, you know, financial health, emotional health, where the boundaries are, you know, consent, resilience. And what is resilience? It's a term that's bandied about an awful lot, probably too much now, but what does resilience actually mean? And young people, particularly navigating the world they're navigating, where there are all of those huge pressures. A dinosaur like me does not engage much with any of you know, social media and what have you, but all of those additional pressures can have a huge impact on the emotional and mental well-being of our young people. So we have some great employability members of staff here who will actually come in that first semester and do workshops with our students to start those conversations and to allow them to know who they can come to talk to if they have any sort of issues. Now, other issues are formally part of the curriculum. So in the business school, we very much focus on organizations, how organizations behave, culture within organizations, how to effectively manage people and support people. So in a number of their modules, that sort of subject content will naturally come up. But I suppose they're learning about that in a more abstract sense because it's not about them. So they are learning the principles of it, but I think it's very important that they also learn themselves through their own development and knowing. I do think a big part of this as well is people feeling that they can say, I have a problem, or I'm not feeling myself, whether that's staff or students, because I think we can provide services, but we need to let people know that it's safe to say out loud, I'm not in a good place, or I'm having difficulties. So I think that's an important one, both for staff and for students.
What, Greg, do you see as the challenges for businesses that companies face when they're implementing that kind of health and well-being initiatives, and how can they overcome them? How have you overcome them in your company?
I'll keep coming back to it because it's going to sound like a broken record, but it is the culture. It has to be important first of all, and resilience was mentioned there now. So resilience is something we all look for in workforce, but you have to invest in it. You know, you have to invest in it. So things don't happen by accident. So you need to kind of have a proper framework for this stuff. You know, you can't just hope it'll happen, you know. So there are kind of 4 principles in it. You've got your leadership and the culture at the centre, which must believe in it and drive it and realise that it's important, and understand that it's important. You've got your kind of people team that kind of hits up with the HR team. So they obviously know where to direct people to and know the policies and make sure we've got really progressive, proper policies in place and where you direct people to if they need external help, which is very important to us as well. And then you have your line managers. So they are managing people, that they know how to have proper conversations with people and identify things that they're properly trained as well. They understand it. And then you have or everybody else, the people themselves, employees, and that kind of self-awareness piece there, and that they take responsibility for themselves, where again, educating them on that there and making sure that they understand that that's important for themselves, their own well-being. And we've just come off the back of Fabulous. For instance, we do FinTrU Fabulous, which is a whole month of activities around mental health and well-being. Everything you can think of, everybody's involved with it. But that rolls out through the whole year, you know. So we have activities every week on this stuff, because it's important to us, you know. And as I said, like if you could play games at this stuff, you could have a policy, and you could have people will self-select, you know, like, you know, and Northern Ireland's pretty high employment at the moment, you know, and particularly in our sector, people just go and work for an organisation that does care, you know, and that's word of mouth is very, very important, and what we do, and having a reputation of being genuine and genuinely involved. So we have a huge diversity and inclusion piece as well. That's part of it as well. And it's really it has to be, I keep saying, a core of what you do, and not just a kind of nice add-on.
That's good points that you were making there. I mean, that whole business about high employment here and working for a company that actually really does care. I mean, Catherine, productivity, big problem in the UK, and we're at the top of the list for the bad guys, unfortunately, rather than in a good way. So this surely then contributes to employee engagement and retention and productivity.
I think without a doubt, and I think, the idea of talent retention is seriously important. What we know, and we just know this, that whenever we lose people because of ill health or because of attrition, actually that has significant detrimental impacts on the people who are left behind. And actually then, we run risks of having stress and burnout because, of course, in the interim period until that person's replaced, then you have other people doing their job. And actually, it's not come at an insignificant financial cost either, because recruiting, onboarding, advertising, and the loss of productivity during that period actually has significant consequences for particularly small to medium-sized companies. And I think, that's one of the reasons I think that we really need to be sure that, I think as Greg says, it is about ensuring that also we role model, that it's important that we retain people and that we recognise them for their talent, because I think none of the organisations can afford to lose people, but also we don't want people going negatively outside of our company to another organisation. That's not a good reputational move. So I think, across all of those aspects of it, we want to be sure that we're retaining people. And I guess, we want people to grow and develop, but actually we probably really want them to stay in our organisation as well, because we've invested in them, whether that's a financial investment or whether that's resource and time. And we want people to feel invested in. And I think people who really truly feel invested in stay and are committed to companies and organisations.
How do small companies go about that, Catherine? Because, I mean, it's fine. Big companies have HR departments and investments and wellbeing initiatives and a whole month and all of that kind of thing. But, 99% of companies here in Northern Ireland are SMEs, and it's much closer then, isn't it? And it's much more personal, and sometimes that makes it easier, but sometimes it can make it more difficult.
Yeah, and I think, there's pros and cons in a sense to being a small organisation, because I think certainly in a smaller sort of company, you have the opportunity to know more about your staff and therefore to be more engaged with your actual workforce. You may not have the significant investment opportunities to invest in, quite impressive wellbeing packages. And I was in an organisation quite recently that had a soft playroom for their employees. Certainly not my organisation, but it was a soft playroom, and they could sit and bounce on sort of bouncy balls, and that was supposed to be for their downtime. And our smaller companies, that's not an option. They're probably fighting for space, let alone having a giant room with bouncing balls in it. So I think there are challenges, and I think there is something though about looking beyond what the things are, because large HR organizations or large companies can have things in place like bouncy balls and soft padded rooms, but actually there is probably something which just goes to that cultural piece. And I think we keep coming back to culture, and I think there is something about HR, human resources, it's the human and keeping the human at the center of it. So I don't necessarily think that we need to be sort of always investing in the things. I think it's about investing in the culture.
Look, in case this all starts to feel a bit touchy-feely, which of course, some of it is, like, we work in a business very hard driven. We hit our numbers, hit our deliver our stuff, to get the quality right. The numbers, it has to be bang on. We have to be excellent at what we do. We have very demanding clients. They're very, very demanding. They're top class, world class clients. We work until they expect world-class standards. It has to be delivered, and it has to be excellent. So, you have to be excellent in everything then. You have to be excellent in how you treat your people as well. So sometimes people look at this and think it's a bit, but it's not. It's, do you want the best people working for you who feel engaged? And that's what it's about, and they feel as if they've got a career as well, right? You're interested in the career. That's another part, actually, of mental well-being is, are you genuinely interested in the career? So proper development plan for them, proper training is also part of it. So it's a big mix, but ultimately, there's a client at the end of it and there's delivering stuff, but it's doing it within an environment where people want to work. People won't stay and won't work in an organisation that doesn't care about them.
To what extent, Shirley, are your students aware of that whole? I'm sure they are very aware of the whole fact that it's actually almost full employment here, and it's very much a market that's favourable to employees and difficult for employers.
Very much so, and it's a great position to be in, thankfully, because those of us who are old enough remember when it hasn't always been like that. And I think what's really important, and both Greg and Catherine have touched on this, and in business we would call it the employer brand. And employers need to have a brand. It's not just attached to reputation. It's not just attached to the visuals. It's in terms of what people actually see a company doing for employees. We often talk about this snowflake generation, which to my mind is a slightly derogatory term. Everybody is an individual. It's not fair, I think, to label everybody in that way. But I do think that younger generation are probably that bit more astute and that bit more self-aware in terms of knowing what it is they want and what it is they don't want. And I think COVID, and I was only having this conversation with someone yesterday on another campus about, it almost seems at this stage as if it didn't happen. It just seems such an incredible thing for people to go through, and the impact of that will probably continue to be felt. But I know across all generations, you hear people reevaluating what it is they want from life, and people making career changes. And I think what it's done for our younger generations is to make them have that conversation with each other about what is it they value. Do they want to be working crazy hours? Do they want to have no work-life balance? Everything I'm reading in the research and everything I hear is saying the opposite. They actually want to make sure that they do have that balance in life. So when they're looking at employers, work is a necessary thing. We have to work to live. But I think that's very much how they see it. Work is an enabler to give them the life that they want. And I think an employer that can demonstrably show that they do genuinely care about the welfare of their individuals, and they're willing to be flexible, and they're willing to be creative in that employment contract and how they support people, that's something that the younger generations, the whole model of working is completely changed, not just because of COVID, but just the way of the world. And I think organizations, in terms of how they value their staff, the message that they give to not just their staff, but their brand, developing their brand. It's not just about how much you pay anymore. It's very much about how are you perceived as valuing the people who will come to work for you.
And on those points, what do you see as the emerging issues in this field? What advice would you give to employers, and I'm going to ask all of you this, who are developing health and wellbeing plans for the next few years? Because not everyone's on the same page here, are they?
No, not everybody is. And I suppose I'm fortunate that I work in an institution that has and continues to invest in lots of ways in wellbeing. And for the first time in our people and partnership strategy, we see wellbeing, student wellbeing, staff wellbeing, being actually spoken about explicitly within the strategies. But I do think that there is a piece around making sure that your relationship with your staff is a holistic one. It is about the holistic well-being of the individual. Because as Catherine said, you want to bring your whole self into work, and you want to know that that's going to be supported. I do think we need also an employee-centric approach. I think where policies are developed and where supports are developed, though that dialogue with employees has to take place, because the policymakers may not actually be getting it right, and they maybe need to hear from the people and what their particular needs are. For me as well, I think that we focus a lot on having supports in place when things go wrong. For me, it's about trying to make sure they don't go wrong in the first place within what is possible. Life happens, things happen, people find themselves in difficult situations. And they're the things sometimes we can't control, but there are things we can control. And I think that's a very important conversation to have around how do we make sure we don't get to the point where we need to refer someone to go to different supports because it's gone too far. And I think that part as well, I do believe that employers can provide the right culture, the right supports, the right initiatives, but there is also an onus on individuals where they can to be able to look after their own selves as well. So for example, if you were to ask me, do I have work-life balance? Absolutely not. Who is that down to? Me primarily, because I manage my workload. So I do think that everybody is a stakeholder in this. Employers can do so much, and they do need to create the correct environments where people do feel they can speak about how they're feeling. But I think individuals as well need to take some responsibility in that as much as we all possibly can.
Greg, what do you see as the emerging issues? What are you going to be dealing with in this field in the next few years?
There's always, you always have to be very aware of the society and what's going on in terms of people's lives as well. The thing we've started to do recently is financial well-being stuff as well, a lot, so we pay our people well. But, people manage their own finances, for instance, something we started to do recently with our own finance team and bring external help, how they manage their own personal budgets, how they do switching costs for energy costs, how we do stuff, so there's, you be aware of what's happening out in the world out there. Cost of living's getting very high, it was very high. So we put a lot of program around that and how we support people in managing their own. A lot of our people are young and they're in tenancy agreements with landlords, how to deal with them, how to deal with issues around that. So, we've had to develop that because that's our kind of a big part of our cohort. And so you're always being aware of what's out there, what those emergent things are in society that might impact you. And obviously any regulatory stuff is coming out as well. That's kind of bottom line stuff. And then it's just general. So the impact of AI is huge. It's going to be huge. So a lot of what we do now is it's going faster change and people's jobs are going to change. So which can be stressful and uncomfortable for people. So, a lot of what we're looking at now is what will the impact be on our organization of AI? Because we develop AI ourselves, and that will affect other people and the work of what they're currently doing will change. So being aware of that and managing change and managing that kind of, because that's stressful when you think it's going to change. We don't do this anymore, we're going to do this thing over here. We don't get sure to be retrained. So it's just really having that constant radar on what's out there in the environment and what's coming, and and just have that in your forefront all the time.
There's a lot going on there, isn't there, Catherine?
A lot.
I'm interested in your perspective.
So I guess a lot of what I would have said has already just been said, and I think we're probably really all on the same page with that. I think, though, that we all have a duty of care to our colleagues and our teams and our workforce. And actually, I think that once we really enact that duty of care, we will have healthy businesses alongside a healthy workforce. I really do I'm really keen on that idea of bringing your whole self to work and ensuring that we have psychologically safe environments in which people can be vulnerable and authentic. I think that really is key to how we really shape a sort of sustainable, positive culture going forward. But I also think that actually a lot of that is role modeled from the top. And I think we really need to get role modeling right for our senior leaders. And we could probably have an entire session on that because work-life balance, etc. I think there's a lot in that. But I do think that we need to be ensuring that actually being authentic is not being vulnerable for our senior leaders, or maybe it is, and maybe that's a good thing. But I do think that is going to be key moving forward, is people feeling respected and operating in a really psychologically safe environment to be themselves at work.
Terrific. Thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious that you've all been very attentive and I know you've been listening. I'm also very aware that we've got a fantastically mixed audience here from some charities, local businesses, the university, various government departments and so on. And we have a roving mic. Sean has charge of it here, and I'd very much look forward to some questions from you if you'd like to put them to our panel, who'd be very happy to hear from you.
Hi, I'm Simon, and I work in IT also. Just a question on what we really have become focused on is mental health in IT world in particular. How do we ensure that we're not just paying lip service to it? We can tick a box, we can have it on our website, we can have it in the HR pack. How do we ensure we are not just paying lip service?
Simon, thanks very much indeed for your question.
Yeah, well, that to me, that really sets it, the leadership and ownership of the organisation, because it is very, I have worked for organisations that, that did a lot of things with it, policies and that and other, but really, they were doing the minimum or doing what they had to do, really. But a really good employer drives it from the centre. Some of the stuff in our mental health stuff, some of our senior people have stood up and said the mental health issues that they have had and explained it and lead some of those committees, So it's like genuineness is the real thing there, that it's a genuine understand of what the issues are and want to do something about it. And there's no substitute for that. It's really hard to get away from that, because you could have all the policies, you could have all that, and people will see through it anyway, if you're not. So really the culture has to come from the top, I believe. It has to come from the top, and you need the policies not there, but it has to come from the top. You have to believe in it. It has to be important to them. That's fundamental.
Shirley?
I think also in addition to that, there is a piece around this that probably is very often lost, and that's measuring impact. Policy is really only worth the paper it's written on unless it is implemented, and not just implemented, but then measured to see, has it had the impact that was intended? And you only get to measure that impact if you speak to employees, you have to get their feedback, you have to get the data from employees, because only then can you know if what you're doing is actually having impact. And that's the whole point of investing in well-being, is knowing that what you are intending to do is having the right impact. And I think that's the piece very often we don't do well.
So it has to work, Catherine.
It has to work, and I'm definitely a data and evidence girl, and I think there is something about making sure that we have the data and the evidence, but sometimes a lot of it really is, are you retaining your workforce? Because if you're seeing people leave, we really need really good quality exit interviews. We need to find out why people are choosing to go somewhere else, and sometimes we really want them to go somewhere else because it's an opportunity that we can't offer them ourselves. It's maybe a foreign or international travel opportunity, but actually if it was a role that they could have had within our organisation, we need to find out why they've left. And I think there is something about making sure that we do measure what attrition looks like, but more importantly, the cause of that attrition. So, I'm a big fan of exit interviews, but also get it before they exit. So, are we doing proper, annual reviews with people, 6 monthly reviews where we're talking to them about them and not just about what they're producing for our organisation. So I think there is something about, are you meeting the objectives of the organisation? And that should be part of the conversation. But actually another part of the conversation should be, what can we do to support you? And then what can you do that we don't know yet? What's the talents that you have hidden? So I think there's quite a lot that we need to do in this space to make sure that we don't lose people. But I do think one of the ways of measuring if things are working is, are people using their feet and closing the door behind them on the way out?
Thank you very much. Simon, thanks for the question. Do we have another question?
Thank you. Hugh McCann. I'm Vice Chair of Alzheimer's Society UK. The question is, we have a lot of people working from home. Now, forgive me if you've already addressed this, but they bring particular issues around health and well-being in the workplace when the workplace is in our own family home. We also have an issue about recruiting and retention, as you've mentioned, and that recruiting without retaining is like having a tap turned on without the faucet in. So I would like a little bit more, if you like, discussion around when people are at home and they're facing issues relating to mental health, loneliness, and we know BMA and World Health Organization said that loneliness now is equivalent to smoking, 16 cigarettes a day or something like that. So we're seeing a lot of people who are working at home, who don't want to go back into the office, but are suffering from loneliness or suffering from stress, anxiety, and I just wonder if you haven't already dealt with it, how do you focus on those sort of issues? Thank you.
Thanks very much for the question.
So we were an organisation that all worked in the office. COVID was a game changer. Everybody had to work from home for 2 years. Our productivity figures went up. because we measure everything. It's not as though stuff can't be measured. But our findings has been really that there's a wear on that after a period of time then, and that, you know, some people do start to suffer. So really we're now in hybrid mode, where the language we use, we strongly recommend that people come in 2 days a week. We really want to see them. We do a lot of stuff to attract them into the office. We do all kinds of activities and all kinds of things to bring them in, to make it a place to be. And we find that those numbers going up. We find when people come into the office that people are creatures of habit. You know, so if the habit has been in the office every day, going home was huge. It was all kinds of issues around people working from home. It was huge. After 2 years, people started to come into the office, because people after 2 years get used to working home, and any change is big, you know. So, but we found that most people now prefer even to come in 1 day a week or 2 days a week. We'd like to see people 2 days a week because of that exact issue. People getting isolated. You not really understand what's going on there. You can't understand people if you're looking at them over a screen 5 days a week. You just can't, you know. So we really like to see our people in at least 2 days a week, and that's for their well-being, because we work quite well from home. It doesn't make it, you know, it's not in terms of our output, that's not an issue for us. And I say, because we measure, so it's not as though, you know, this myth, people sit home doing nothing, doesn't exist in our world, right? So, but we have definitely tried to get people back into the office entirely because of their well-being. And by the way, when we send people home, we also supply them ergonomic chairs. We have some with the desk. We give them. It wasn't just we sent them a laptop home, but our big drive is for people as the hybrid model. And I don't think we'll ever go back to 5 days a week in most organisations like us. I think those days have gone. But I think that the right model is hybrid, and that's great. That gives people a balance of life. They can have 3 days at home. You know, it's great. It's a great change. The one silver lining out of COVID was that, and it's been a real game changer. So, and that's a lot of people have benefited from that as well, particularly a lot of female employees as well who have children. I know it sounds, you know, men as well, but you know, very often they've caring responsibilities, and that has helped them as well. So, and men, but I think generally speaking, the hybrid model is much better, and that's we're in a better space now. I think we've been either all at home or all at work. I think it's the right place to be.
Catherine, physiology, I think, is your thing, isn't it? I mean, physiologically, what does loneliness and feeling isolated and maybe having that distance between you and work, what does that do to you?
Well, I think, you know, certainly the comment and the question a moment ago, I think is really well made in terms of actually there's quite a lot of research going on globally now that is comparing loneliness and the sort of physiological effects of loneliness to significant heart disease. And so I think there is certainly a lot that we need to be doing in that space. I think there is certainly significant health impacts on people who are spending quite a long time at home and often by themselves during the day. One of the things, incidentally, you know, that we've seen, particularly with home working, actually is this sharp increase in obesity, because people are snacking at home. And, you know, unlike being in the office where you're sort of having a bit of a walk to the kitchen or to the canteen, or you're going to meet people in the corridor, a lot of people, as you just said, spend a lot of that day by themselves. And they generally take a break. They have a cup of tea and possibly a chocolate biscuit. And actually, we're seeing significant increases in obesity. And actually, of course, then, as we know, that has, you know, onward sort of problems with both mental health, but also physiological health as well. So I think there is a lot of challenges. I'm someone who loves home working, but actually I think that there's a lot of people, and it plays to a lot of people's personality types to be at home by themselves and working and interacting. But also I think we've seen significant detriment, particularly to females who are doing their home job as well as their actual job, and the stress that has caused for them. So I think home working doesn't work for everyone. Hybrid working, I think, is possibly a better option. But one of the things I think that, you know, I've reflected on, and, you know, a lot of scientists are introverts. A lot of my scientific staff work better at home, and they work better in a sort of teams environment. So I think there is something about understanding the psychology of your team and your workforce as well, and where they're best placed to do their job, and not everyone is the same. Yes, I mean, I would agree with everything that both Greg and Catherine have said.
We're in a slightly different situation in the university, at least for academic staff. We've always had a hybrid working model if you're an academic member of staff, because there are days you can work at home. And as Greg says, I actually work much more productively at home because nobody's knocking at my door. Nobody's coming in for 5 minutes and staying half an hour for a chat. So I get an awful lot more done, as well as taking the commute in and out to work out of the equation as well. That said, I found COVID very difficult, and I agree with what Catherine is saying. The novelty wore off quite quickly. And I think there are personality types. I have friends who now work remotely all of the time. And I have to say, I couldn't cope with that. And I have said, if we go into lockdown again, now I was at home homeschooling 4 kids while at the same time trying to do my day job while my husband was out working. And I was lucky to escape that period with my sanity off and saying, I jest you not. So I've said I will be on a rocket to the moon if we go into lockdown again, because I'm not living through that again. I just might not get through it a second time. So coming back into work is something very much I need for my mental health, because I could feel my mental health suffering by being at home all of the time. So we have that nice balance of having reverted back to hybrid. Interestingly, our non-academic members of staff now have the ability to work flexibly. So they now also have a hybrid model as a result of COVID, which means they also have that flexibility. And I do think that there are certain people who are just suited to full-time remote working, and there are those who are not. And from my perspective, the hybrid model would be the better.
Thanks very much indeed. I'll take one more question if we have one.
Can we just comment on the fact that we're living in an increasingly connected world, but we are becoming increasingly disconnected, and how that we can ensure we connect properly with people again, not just in technology, but on an individual and personal level?
That's an interesting one, actually, Catherine, isn't it?
It certainly is. And I think that probably goes to sort of one of the points that we sort of discussed earlier, and that's about how we make our workplaces slightly different from what they were pre-COVID, now that we are in a hybrid model, because you're absolutely right. There's something about ensuring that we have personal connections, which are very different, I think, as we will all agree, on a sort of Teams or Zoom type environment. And I think we're seeing a lot of big organizations, particularly sort of international organizations, changing the shape of what their office looks like. So rather than having a desk type environment, having much more a sort of Teams based environment now. And I think that certainly will speak to how we ensure the people really do have that sort of truly personal interaction. And I think certainly, we've seen significant improvements even in the last 6 to 8 months in terms of, some of the neural networks and AI and machine learning tools. And that, if anything, is really just going to increase our reliance on devices. But I think certainly from a workplace perspective, we're absolutely seeing workplaces and employers being slightly more aware of the need to remodel what the interior space looks like to ensure, workplaces really do have that real personal connection rather than people coming in and sitting at a desk. I think the days of doing that are gone, and only seeing someone in a corridor or in a lift or in a kitchen in your workplace. I think there is certainly a significant shift now in bigger organisations to move to certainly a lot more that Teams-based space. And I think that can only be good in terms of ensuring that we retain that sort of personal connection with people.
Have you done that, Greg, in your offices, or have you chosen other ways of maybe fostering connections from the disconnect? So we do invest a lot in our property, even though a lot of people moved out of property. We put a lot of money into our canteen, and it's like it's got pool tables. It's a brilliant space. It's as nice a space as you're going to find. So, and our offices are all look really well. It's important they're working away with people come in if they come into like a dungeon. So it looks really, really well. We spend money on it. We're very conscious of it.
We also do things like True Connections, where randomly your name's selected and you come in any levels and you meet up and you have a cup of coffee with somebody and, and you chat to them, and that's done. It's just picked up randomly, and every week you've got your True Connection and you meet them in the canteen, or you go for a cup of coffee outside, whatever. You just have a chat with them and catch up, So, but it is, it is an issue that, that what they call the switched on generation, who are never off, But these are emerging things, like you to ask around what's emerging, so these are things that are emerging that I think we're going to have to deal with, and increasingly so the generations coming through now, and that's people are seeing it in schools, they're seeing it, there are issues around that. So awareness is a starting point, obviously, of it, but getting people to unplug is the big thing. We actually do a thing called FinTrU Unplugged, where I think I did this before, but so after 4 years, you get 5 years, you get 4 years, you get a month completely off, and you unplug and you go traveling. So that's something we come up with to get people to do, just to unplug and not out of the system, and they just go on top of the holidays, and you meant to take the full month and you go and do so. So you have to be creative too in terms of some of this, try and encourage people not to be, to be away from the work as well at times, because so very often what people is they fit in too many. You can fit in too many hours where you work from home in particular can be an issue. People don't know what that, if you're working at home, you're not knocking off. You can be sitting suddenly, you have your tea or whatever, and you're back on logged at home doing it, which is not what you want. Just burnout,
And I do think as well that it very much depends what generation you're a part of. So I think the connected bit for those of us who are that little bit older probably is rooted in that whole COVID thing. That we found that suddenly everything was done through Zoom and then laterally through Teams. So that reconnection piece is a little bit easier. Takes a little bit of time, because even though COVID was, over a period of time, I think the impact of it is a little bit more lasting. So in our work, we're trying not to do Teams meetings where possible. We're trying to get people around a table for committee meetings and department boards. And it's actually quite novel to sit around a table again and to look at the whites of people's eyes and actually have that connectedness with each other. It's actually quite novel. I think the bigger challenge, as Greg said, is for the younger generations. And anybody who's got teenagers at home will know that they now have 3 hands, and one of them is a telephone, and it never seems to leave them, wherever they go, no matter how good your intention is as a parent. So I think those sorts of challenges, even in terms of the ability to communicate effectively with another individual, instead of 2 friends walking down the street and texting each other, rather than actually having a conversation, which does happen, oddly, bizarrely. So I do think there are going to be more challenges around that for that generation. But part of me, being the optimistic realist, is hoping that, like all pendulums, it'll swing back the other way at some stage. And hopefully, even though we'll never wind back completely to being a non-tech society, I am hoping that somewhere we'll find a better equilibrium than we have right now. Wishful thinking potentially, but I do hope.
Well, it's nice to end on an upward note, a bit of wishful thinking indeed. Catherine, Greg and Shirley, thank you all very much indeed for your wisdom and your experience today. It's been fascinating hearing from you. And thanks to our audience for being here as well. This is the Business of Possibility podcast with Ulster University Business School. You can catch up on the episodes from the previous 3 series wherever you get your podcasts. So please do subscribe, rate us, and of course, tell all your friends and colleagues as well. Thanks very much for being here, and good afternoon.